So Father Rick is our technician from St. John's today, and he's also the backup moderator. So Father Rick, you may start your recording at any time now. Thank you. Yadira y Madeline, bienvenido y gracias por estar aquí. Thank you for, I just said in my very bad family Spanish to welcome them very much for being here, and that we thank them for their presence. And Madeline's going to be translating for Yadira, and we're just so happy that Migrant Justice can be here. So we will, just so everyone's familiar with the format today, we have 5 panelists and Madeline with helping Yadira, and we're going to cycle through 2 questions that are going to go to the in the order of panelists as I introduced them at the beginning. And at the very end, we're going to try to have an open discussion within the constraints of Zoom, and we'll see how it goes. So first, we would like to begin and also acknowledge the land that we are on. And so I will read the land acknowledgement. We would like to begin this meeting recognizing and honor the Abenaki people. We acknowledge the shared learning takes place on Nakina, which is within the Wabanaki Confederacy, which is the unceded traditional land of the Abenaki that we in Vermont are living on. We recognize that colonialism and the oppression of Native peoples is an ongoing and current process, and we commit to building our awareness of our present participation and work to end it. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and the Anobak, which means people, who have stewarded Nakida through the generations. And we ask you all to acknowledge the past, present, and future Abenaki elders who have lived, currently live, and live in this space. We also want to acknowledge the erasure and exclusion of the Abenaki nation in this space physically, culturally, and ideologically. Let our spheres of influence as educators and learners to rebuild our understanding of history in a way that amplifies the voices and lived experience of the Abenaki people, past, present, and future. And let us strive to decolonize our education, our teaching, and our schools and our land. So we thank them for the place that we now reside on. The panel members for today, I'll read a very brief introduction to each one of them. Sue Minter, she'll be the first in our cycle. She is the Executive Director of Capstone Community Action, an anti-poverty nonprofit dedicated to creating resilient households and advancing social, economic, and environmental justice. Sue has been a public servant for well over 20 years, serving as the Secretary of the Vermont Agency for Transportation, Deputy Secretary. As with everyone on this, their background, and we're so pleased to be here. Gary Gordon, welcome, sir. Appreciate you attending today. He's a community support worker, emergency service worker, and emergency services team leader in Washington County. He's in the Washington County Mental Health Services in Montpelier. Sir, thank you. I realize that some of the emergency team work may also draw your way, so we stand ready if you get called. Next is Yadira Miranda, and Yadira Miranda and her interpreter, Madeline Charo, are part of Migrant Justice, and I just want to read a little bit from their mission of Migrant Justice, and that their mission is to build the voice, capacity, and power of the farm worker community and engage community partners to organize for economic justice and human rights. And they gather the farm worker community to discuss and analyze problems and to envision collective solutions. This is an ongoing work of both love and concern for our brethren who are in the migrant community And as an agricultural state, we depend on this community and the work of migrant justice to ensure fairness for all. The next in the panel is Earl Kooperkamp, and he is the rector of the Church of the Good Shepherd in Barrie. I'm still talking like I'm a flatlander in Barrie, Vermont. He has served as president of the board of Vermont Interfaith Action, and 2 years ago helped organize the Poor People's Campaign in Vermont. Sir, thank you also for joining us today. And finally on the panel, we're pleased that Jan Daniels could join us. She's Jen, there's so much in your background, so I'm just going to read the very top, and you'll forgive me. Jen is also going to be the moderator for the second panel in February, so doubly pleased here. She's a licensed landscape architect whose dedication to the well-being of communities and landscape originates in a deep connection with culture striving to overcome social injustice. Her career in the past included over 7 years in the nonprofit sector as a professional community organizer and facilitator, focused on race relations, conflict transformation, leadership training, and community development in starkly divided urban areas. And just like with everyone in the group today, their life and resume goes on, and we thank them for being here. So this part of the program, I'm going to bring forward 2 questions based upon speeches or letters of Martin Luther King as a launching point for this. And the first part of this is Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech on April 14th, 1967. This speech is often known as the Other America, and this was at Stanford University. And I'm just going to quote briefly from this as a starting point. He says, and I'd like to use as a subject from which to speak this afternoon, the other America. And I use this subject because there's literally 2 Americas. One America is beautiful for our situation, and in a sense, this America is overflowing with the miracle of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is a habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies and culture and education and for their minds. And then he goes on to say, but tragically and unfortunately, there's another America. This other America is a daily ugliness that it constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. And in his speech, he says, in a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what does it do to the other children? Little children in this America are forced to grow up with clouds of inferiority, farming every day in their lives. And as we look at this other America, we see it as an arena of blasted hopes and shattered dreams. Many people of various backgrounds live in this other America. Some are Mexican American, some are Puerto Ricans, others are Indians, and some happen to be from other groups. Millions of them are also Appalachian whites. Probably the largest group in this other America in proportion to the size and population is the American Negro. He goes on to say that they find themselves in a triple ghetto, a ghetto of race, a ghetto of poverty, a ghetto. And to deal with this problem is to deal with the problem of 2 Americas. We are seeking, he says, to make this America one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice and all. And I think this is so relevant in the look of the last couple of weeks that we have been involved in. And so I would like to make this as a launching point for our panelists, starting with Sue. And I'm just going to mark about 5 minutes for each panelist to give you all times to talk, and I will signal when you're down to 1 minute. So Sue, if you would take over at this point. You'll need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Sue.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us. It is a tremendous honor for me to be a part of this gathering and this conversation. I am also a neighbor in Waterbury Center. I see some of my neighbors on this call too. Capstone Community Action, it is so fitting, frankly, to be a part of the conversation because our organization, an anti-poverty organization here in Vermont since 1965, was really born from the civil rights movement and the so-called war on poverty of the 1960s. So to continue in that legacy is tremendous. I can't think of a more fitting theme, Jack, than the one you have chosen, the two Americas. And I want my comments to briefly reflect on that reality of today. I want to begin by two things. First, my quote from Martin Luther King for today that I think is relevant not only for the themes that you've asked us to talk about, but for the current state of our democracy. And he stated, "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality." Those are key words for right now: truth and justice. I also want to just make sure that we begin our discussion recognizing the pain and loss and healing, thinking about and remembering the almost 390,000 people in this country taken by the terrible COVID pandemic, and all the millions of others infected and afflicted by this disease. And I want us to know that this is an unprecedented time, an unprecedented health crisis, which is now exacerbating an economic crisis. And I think this is true particularly in the United States, where until now we really have had no national strategy. But I think the tables are turning and the tides are changing. So one of the many things that the pandemic has done is to really shine a bright light on the racial and economic disparity and inequality of this country. These two Americas, and I say two Vermonts, of which King spoke of in what was that, 67, did you say, Jack? Are very, very real today. And what's important to realize is that this economic disparity preceded the COVID pandemic. Even between 1990 and 2016, the wealth gap between America's richest and poorest families more than doubled. So in these past 2 decades, it has gotten much worse. In 2016, the 5% of Americans, the richest 5% of Americans, made 248 times as much wealth as the median income earners. So this gap between rich and poor preceded the pandemic and actually existed even as the stock market soared to unprecedented highs, and we believed that we were in a tremendous economic recovery. So much I have personally learned since becoming the director of Capstone Community Action just over 2 years ago of poverty is hidden, particularly in rural states like ours. But it is there, it is present, and it is very real. And it is real, particularly in Lamoille County, where I know this interfaith community is seated. Capstone Community Action did a needs assessment of our service area, which is Lamoille, Washington, and Orange County. And in that service area, Lamoille had the most challenging statistics: the lowest median income, the highest poverty rate, the highest child poverty rate, the highest number of aging Vermonters in poverty, the highest rate of uninsured people, the highest rate of unemployed people, and a rate where there is very high homelessness and zero residential vacancy rate. Many, many challenges particular to Lamoille County, which is why Capstone has done significant investment in the county. And I want to just mention our programs where we look forward to engaging you. Our Vermont Everyone Eats program, we are bringing 6,000 meals per week to families who need it throughout our region. Meals produced and paid for by our local restaurants. We are involved in a new Working Communities Challenge program, engaging our community in a great conversation about improving our workforce and opportunity. I want to thank you for recognizing this important problem and challenge and working with us, and especially to thank this interfaith community for starting the Lamoille Community Fund, which has raised $70,000 given out in small increments to those with acute needs. Much more to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. I'd like to go to Gary Gordon. And I just also ask you to talk a little slower than normal so that Madeline is translating actively for Yadira. So Gary, if you would continue and leverage off our quote. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Jack. I would like to start out by saying thank you to my friend Jim Charkalis for inviting me to participate, and also for the Interfaith Council for accepting me as a panelist. I'm honored to be chosen, and I'm really happy to participate in this forum. I'd like to start out, if I may, by reading a prayer, a Baha'i prayer, that was written by Abdul Baha, the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith. And this prayer is called a Prayer for America. Baha'is believe that the United States of America has a leadership role in the world in leading the world to the unity of mankind. And I'd just like to read this briefly. O thou kind Lord, this gathering is turning to thee. These hearts are radiant with thy love. These minds and spirits are exhilarated by the message of thy glad tidings. O God, let this American democracy become glorious in spiritual degrees, even as it has aspired to material degrees, and render this just government victorious. Confirm this reverent nation to upraise the standard of the oneness of humanity, to promulgate the most great peace, to become thereby most glorious and praiseworthy among all the nations of the world. O God, this American nation is worthy of thy favors and is deserving of thy mercy. Make it precious and near to thee through thy bounty and bestowal. As I was reading the first statement from Dr. King, from his speech at Stanford University, I reflected on my own life. I'm of the age where I grew up in the South, and I think I can legitimately say that I was part of that second America, growing up in the segregated South, attending segregated schools for the bulk of my academic career, all the way through until graduate school, having to go to schools that were not as equipped as the schools on the other side of town. I remember taking physics and advanced biology and not having the kind of equipment that the other schools have so that we could do the kind of experience that they did. And what brought that to mind is that there's currently, there's a commercial on TV where there's a young African-American woman who is, she said she's an engineer, I believe, and she joined Amazon. And she said the reason why she did that is because children of color do not have access to STEM education and to the tools to learn the STEM topics. And she says she's a fighter, and she joined Amazon to try to make a change to that. And I thought about that, and I said that's the same thing that was going on 50 years ago when I was in school, going to the segregated schools down in St. Petersburg, Florida. We did not have the same opportunity to study the sciences that people in the other community, in the other America had. And that brought me to the idea of the animating principle, the pivot around which the Baha'i faith revolves, is the idea of the oneness of humanity. You know, our founder, Baha'u'llah, said very clearly that you're the leaves of one tree and the fruits of one branch. He uses a lot of metaphors and images to talk about the unity of mankind. He talks about us as being the drops of one ocean. And he says unequivocally that the earth is one country and mankind is citizens. And this is a principle. It's not a euphemism. It's an animating principle that, if put into effect, would bring us to a time when the things that Martin Luther King preached and hoped for, we would realize. as both a country and as a world. And as people of faith, I think it's important that we keep that in mind. I think it's important that we keep in mind that Martin Luther King was a man of faith, and that his call was a call to people of faith, and that this was our mission and this was our task. I think sometimes we forget, and we don't, maybe it's not talked about enough, that Dr. Martin Luther King was a minister, that his movement and the civil rights movement was launched as a spiritual and moral movement. It was not a political movement in its beginnings. I think we have to keep that as people of faith. We have to keep that in mind, and we have to call attention to that this is the work that God wants us to do. You know, it is our destiny. We are required to become unified and to become one family on this planet. And as we realize that, I think we will realize that, first of all, we will have the will and the capacity to tackle these seemingly intractable problems that we all talk about. And we will realize the fluorescence of a world commonwealth where everybody in this country will truly be a citizen of this earth, with freedom to move about and freedom to realize their full potential.
All right, thank you, Gary. Very much appreciate your thoughts adding to this. At this point, if we could go to Yadira, Tutano Ahora, and Madeline will translate.
Madeline, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Earl.
Dale, Yadira. Yadira, ¿estás en mute todavía? ¿No? Ok. Si hablas más ¿qué tal si colgamos la llamada? Yeah, okay. Está bien. Okay, she's just hanging up. We're on the phone too. ¿Nos escucha, Yadira?
¿No?
¿Ah, sí?
A ver, veo qué puedo hacer.
Está bien.
¿Sí? ¿Ahora se escucha?
Sí. Dale.
Hola, mucho gusto. Es un placer para mí estar con ustedes. Personas que son de fe, que son un gran ejemplo para nosotros y una gran inspiración. Y eso nos hace sentir que no estamos solos como comunidad inmigrante, que hay personas que están tratando de cambiar y aportar como un granito de arena para tratar de cambiar el mundo. Nosotros como comunidad inmigrante no es diferente a los demás, porque también nosotros sufrimos, padecemos, somos tratados de una manera realmente mal, y familias viviendo en condiciones lamentablemente desafortunadas, porque tenemos el miedo de levantar la voz, porque somos de cierta manera intimidados para que no podamos hacer valer nuestros derechos, como en los trabajos. Nosotros no podemos exigir algún salario, aumento de salario, exigir una buena vivienda, o si algo nosotros sentimos que no estamos siendo tratados bien, tenemos miedo de hablar con alguno de los patrones o con alguien más por miedo a que seamos echados de los trabajos y nosotros aquí no tenemos un lugar donde vivir. ¿O dónde sale uno de rápido con nuestros hijos? Para los que tenemos hijos y para los que no tienen hijos, es que no pueden salir del trabajo porque no hablan el idioma, no tienen papeles, tienen miedo de ser deportados, o por los mismos personas que sigue habiendo, personas racistas que siguen clasificando y separando a la gente. Ellos no piensan que somos seres humanos igual que los ciudadanos americanos, ¿no? Ellos piensan que somos delincuentes porque somos peor tratados que, que un animal. Un perrito todavía tiene en una casa un lugar exacto donde va a vivir, son tratados humanamente.
Está bien si traduzco y pues.
Sí, y luego continuamos.
Okay, so I'm just going to translate that and then I can continue. But she says it's a huge pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I'm also a person of faith, and so it's a huge inspiration to be part of this conversation, and it makes us feel less alone, myself and the migrant community, seeing people interested and wanting to get involved, contributing their grain of sand to help change the world. The migrant community is not different in this situation with the two Americas. We're suffering and we're struggling. We're treated badly in many situations. There are families that are living in really ugly living conditions. And this produces fear for us to lift up our voices. It creates intimidation. And it makes it hard for us to fight for our rights. It's hard to do things like ask for a better salary or for better housing. If something happens in our workplace, it's difficult for us to stand up and confront our bosses, knowing that we could be fired, we could be made to leave our housing, and then not knowing where we would go. Many of us have children, and we don't speak the language here. And also with issues of immigration, many of us don't have papers, so we could be deported. And we also know that there are many racist people in this country who don't see us as equals, who want to see us treated badly, even treated like animals in some cases. Dale.
¿Puedo continuar?
Sí, sí.
Sí. Entonces, por eso yo escucho las historias de los demás y lo que platican. Y entonces nosotros vivimos en lo de las dos Américas. Nosotros vivimos en la sombra, tratando de que el país salga adelante, pero no somos reconocidos. Por eso, cuando conocimos de la organización Justicia Migrante, pues nosotros nos sentimos apoyados y no dudamos 2, 3 veces en unirnos a la organización, porque nos da como un motivo a luchar, no por nosotros, no por mí, sino por toda la comunidad, de no tener miedo, de tratar de salir, hablar.
Yadira, un minuto.
Sí.
Sí. Madeline.
Okay. ¿Está bien si traduzco entonces?
Sí.
Okay. And so I'm hearing lots of stories and experiences from other members in my community, and I believe that we do live in these two Americas, that the migrant community is living in the shadows and is not being recognized. And so when we got involved with migrant justice and began to feel that connection and support, it's given us a way to organize and to struggle. And not just for myself personally, but for my whole community, to not have this fear and to raise our voices and come out of the shadows.
Gracias todos. Earl, if you would go ahead, sir.
Yes, good afternoon, my sisters and brothers. Muy buenas tardes, mi hermanos y hermanas y hermanos. And thank you so much for this invitation. Gracias por esta invitación. When I read that quote from Dr. King's 1967 speech in Stanford about the other America, it immediately brought to mind two other sources that I think might well have been on Dr. King's mind. One was from Michael Harrington's 1962 book entitled The Other America. Harrington went on to found the Democratic Socialists that our Senator Bernie Sanders represents so well. And then there was also, though, in Dr. King's understanding in that speech of the real intergenerational effects of poverty, what happens in that other America, the difficulties of succeeding generations, put me in mind especially of the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education, where Thurgood Marshall, while he was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund before he was Supreme Court Justice, argued using the work of Dr. Kenneth Clark on the what segregation was doing to African American children in our society. And so I think those laid in the background that about a month after that speech, in a retreat, Dr. King and some of the leadership of the Southern Christian Leadership Council began coming up with the idea of the Poor People's Campaign, which was launched approximately 6 months later in 1967. And the project that Dr. King was really undertaking up to the point of his assassination in Memphis. But there we have to remember that in Memphis as well, that was part of the Poor People's Campaign, to be there with the sanitation workers who'd gone on strike in Memphis. And that, I think it's that legacy that was revived by Dr. William Barber and Dr. Liz Theo Harris a few years ago in their new Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, which we brought here to Vermont. And the importance of that is remembering that there's not only another America, there's another Vermont, just as Sue has talked about, as Yadira has so dramatically told us about. Sometimes we call it backroad poverty here in Vermont. But I think it is so crucial for us in learning lessons today from Dr. King to remember there's another America, there's another Vermont. And how is it that we are to take the 140 million poor people in this country, the literally tens of thousands of poor people in our own state, form those relationships, do that hard work of organizing like Migrant Justice is doing, that Vermont Interfaith Action is doing, the Greater Stowe Interfaith Council is doing, use that to turn around where we are so that in the unfortunately, after the storming of the Capitol, heard so many calls for unity, which strike me as a citizen as little late in the game. That the way that we'll get unity is by recognizing the other America, the other Vermont, and doing the organizing to overcome poverty, and especially the detrimental effects of poverty that treat other people, as Yadira said, like animals. And that's the lesson that I really pull away from this quote. Dr. King found this other America, pulling him into the Poor People's Campaign. And I think that organizing that he did is still for us today when we're looking at the other Vermont that is still unfortunately alive and well around here.
Thank you, sir. And last for our first panel cycle is Jen Daniels. So what is your reflection, Jen?
First, thank you, Jack, Earl, Yadira, Gary, and Sue. I am truly honored and humbled to be in dialogue with this group. Today I'm here as a Vermont community member of only 3 years, a mother of 3, a wife, business owner, and a member of JCOGS, the Jewish community of Greater Stowe. And most importantly, and a role I take very seriously and with great honor, the vice chair of the Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille. And my fellow steering committee members, brevity, I won't name them all. There are 7 others. This group formed 2 years ago, as some in Stowe will recall, as an alliance of business, civic, school, faith, and community leaders. It came together after a series of horrifying racial and anti-Semitic events in our community. And I know we are all aware that these aggressions and microaggressions happen in our schools every day. And these were the ones that we noticed. This group has grown with many members who have come and gone into REAL. And it really is a point for racial justice work in our county and pushing back against what we've all acknowledged on this panel is systemic injustices. So, and we all know we have to prioritize these. I'm really reflecting on the words of our panelists in response to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with Sue mentioning the 2 Vermonts. And it's something I observe as I drive throughout the county and into the NEK. And I think about Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an American rights advocate and law professor, who said, you cannot change outcomes without understanding how they have come about. And so what I bring to this today, and frankly every day, is trying to pierce the bubble that encloses those 2 Americas. And I've always done this in dialogue, whether that's a dialogue with someone on the street, whether that's a dialogue that's facilitated, like we are attempting to do in REAL, but without creating those places of safety to have really true, honest conversations, I don't believe we can create a just society where everyone thrives. To me, the practice of being an anti-racist means committing to changing that status quo. And as Susanna Davis, our executive director of racial equity for the state of Vermont, so pointedly stated, it is not effective without the participation of the dominant group. And we know that Vermont is that dominant group. So, you know, how do we go about dismantling a white supremacist system that has existed for over 400 years? I look to my Jewish ancestors who struggled as an other, but also were able to use their white privilege to gain acceptance. And so those are my truths that I must come to terms with. Judaism also instills in me this attentiveness to the power of doing good, mitzvah. Sometimes it shows up as a sort of anxiety, and I know we are all experiencing a level of anxiety that is unprecedented, as Sue pointed out. It's a collective trauma, but that trauma is far worse for so many others in that other America. Through the Jewish teachings, and I'll just wrap it up here, I'm also learning to be quiet. And when I say quiet, I don't mean silent and not speaking out, but I mean a stillness that allows us to find clarity. There are so many voices that must be listened to that have not been listened to in the past. And so if we're arriving here today in Vermont as a dominant white population, it is our duty, as Gary said, to show up. And we cannot rush to truth and we cannot rush to wisdom. And as our chair of REAL, I'll say this will be my last sentence, reminds me as we start our meetings to breathe and recall our vision statement, which is all about experiencing dignity and respect, and that all are welcome with kindness and belonging. And I'll pause there. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Jen, and all of the panelists for the first response. The next question comes from the letter from the Birmingham jail. And I use this as inspiration myself, but he wrote in his letter, human progress never rolls on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of people willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes the ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use this time creatively in the knowledge that time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. So as the panelists have reflected upon this statement that now the present is always the time to act, I will ask in the same order that they reflect on this and give us their thoughts. So if we can go to Sue, I'd appreciate you if you would start.
Well, thank you to all of the panelists for those rich comments, and some thoughts have emerged in my head, but reflecting first upon the letter from Birmingham Jail, which I have to just say for me personally, reading, I recalled vividly being a junior in high school and reading about King's life, and especially that letter. And deciding to take action in a very small personal way about violence, and decided to stop eating meat, which I have held to ever since. And I think it's that what this moment in our history calls for is us to act with conscience in whatever sphere we can. Some words came to mind, listening especially to Jen. Leadership, listening, and love. Those are the three things that we can all act on every day in our own sphere. You know, I've had the opportunity to serve in elected office. I've served in the executive branch, and now I'm serving in the most meaningful way because it is direct service. And I want to just tell the story of one of my first clients that I met was a woman who came to Capstone at age 20 something. She was pregnant and she was homeless. And because of her strength and resilience and her exposure, not just to programs which we provide, support for housing, support for food security, support for financial literacy, businesses, workforce development, childcare. This woman is now employed. She has a secure job. She has childcare, and she has broken that generational cycle that Earl spoke to, which is so critical. And yes, she received services, but what she really received was respect and dignity and a different future. She could imagine for the first time in her life a different future. In my own privileged life, I never have questioned my opportunities because I had so much security. And we can do so much for our neighbors, and they are all around us. You may not know that right now there are 85 adults homeless people living in hotels right in the Stowe community. They're living there right now. We are helping to provide food, to provide medical support, emotional wellness, and hopefully a step towards housing security hopefully by June, when the pandemic, we are in a new phase. But 35 of those people, not 85 adults, 35 of whom are actually young adults between the ages of 18 and 21, and then 30 children. Those folks have no home. And yet we are dedicated as a broader community to using this moment of crisis as a transformational opportunity for a better future. Because we cannot allow our country, our community, our nation to go back to the pre-pandemic inequality that I spoke to. We actually have to see this moment and seize this moment as a different opportunity for change in the future. I'm thrilled that Capstone is working with Migrant Justice to help provide stimulus, financial security from the stimulus monies right to the families who have undocumented status. So this is a program that any of you could help support us by bringing us people out of the shadows. We have volunteer opportunities and of course, all of the ways that we are working with you to help provide direct financial assistance to people in need. All of these are ways that you can take action. And of course, I always tell people, step up if you feel the call. Run for office, serve in your select board, serve on your planning commission, participate in the real conversations that your neighbors are having. I truly believe in a brighter future. I am very hopeful. Literally about 2 nights ago, what incoming President Biden has presented as his answer, his rescue for America. It's going to mean significant opportunity right here in Vermont. So thank you all. Those are the thoughts I have. There's so many ways to take action, and the time is absolutely right now.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much. Gary, if you would provide your reflection from the panel also. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Jack. While reflecting about this, it occurred to me that, you know, there's a lot of talk and a lot of concern about what we describe as systemic racism. And it occurred to me that through actually even beginning before the civil rights movement, the entire experiences of the Black community in this country has been our striving for freedom and to be recognized as full human partners. And when you look back at it, when I look back at it, you know, we've had impressive gains legislatively. We've had some gains economically. We've had gains in a lot of areas, but for some reason, this idea that some human beings are less than others continues to influence the way we function as a society. When I saw a picture of this person who was walking through the Capitol with a Confederate flag, you know, I mean, these ideas are still here. Why is it that these ideas have not been changed? What is it that, what are we missing here? And then when I looked at this quote from Dr. King, when he says it comes through tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God, that's where I paused and I said, wait a minute. Here's the solution. What is it that God wants us to do? First of all, are we even acknowledging God in our relationship to him? And secondly, if we're going to work tirelessly on this, as Dr. King has said we should do, and as my faith says that we must do, then what is it that God wants us to do? And it's very clear from the Baha'i perspective. He wants us to be unified. He wants us to eliminate all prejudices of any kind. Okay. And, you know, we recognize that in order to do this, you know, the best instrumentality for that is close love, fellowship, and unity among all people in the human race. Again, it goes back to that principle of the unity of mankind. We have to have a principle from which, a belief from which we can base our actions that brings us together so that we will have the will and the create. And Dr. King talks about being creative in these efforts to solve these problems. Well, I think we have to start from a principle that infuses us with the energy and the creativity to tackle these problems, and that is the unity of the human race. That is the antidote, because our problem, the root problem, and the reason why this systemic racism continues to exist and to rip apart our society is because we are not unified, because people still look at me and others like me as being less than human. Every time I am called the N-word, and I am called the N-word, every time I hear it, every time I make reference to it, it is a reminder to me that in the eyes of many people in this society, I am looked at as being less than human. That's what King was talking about in the first quote. The antidote to that, I'm a firm believer, the antidote is for us to recognize the oneness and the unity of humanity and to base all our actions and all our decisions on that principle. And therefore we will have the capacity and the creativity, and we will develop the creativity to attack these problems and solve them. They continue to exist because we have not acknowledged this. We have to acknowledge, because the well-being of mankind, our peace and security are unattainable unless and until our unity is firmly established. There is no other way. We have to establish the unity of mankind, humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Yadira, tus pensamientos.
¿Nos escucha, Yadira?
Sí,
Sí, pues dale.
sí, pues ahora puedo hablar un poco de los pensamientos que tengo yo para cambiar un poco.
Ujú, ujú.
Ok. Pues mis pensamientos es de estar unidos para intentar cambiar un poco el mundo. Sabemos que es difícil, pero yo en lo personal, yo pienso de qué manera yo puedo ayudar para que ya no haya más racismo, no más lastimarnos entre nosotros como seres humanos y tratar de hacer algo bueno para las generaciones futuras. ¿Qué cosas queremos cambiar? ¿Y qué cosas queremos que ya no vivan nuestros hijos y los hijos de las demás personas? Y también el cambiar la forma de pensamiento como inmigrantes, de que no queremos más separación de familias, queremos vivir en condiciones dignas, queremos ser respetados, valorados. Por eso estamos en la lucha con justicia migrante, para que no haya más polimigra. No queremos más arrestos, no más deportaciones, no más familias divididas. Que los trabajadores de la industria lechera, no nada más de la industria lechera, todo tipo de inmigrantes no tengan miedo a levantar la voz, a presentarse a una marcha, a una reunión como la que ahora tenemos. Pues ahora es por lo del COVID, pero no siempre va a haber COVID. Que ellos no tengan miedo de levantar la voz. ¿Traduce hasta ahí?
Sí, sí. Okay. So to translate, my thoughts about how to be more united, how to change the world. It's hard, and personally, how can I help make changes so that we're not facing this racism, so that we're not hurting each other, to create a better future for generations. What do we want to change, and what do we want our children to not have to live through, and our children's children? We want to change the immigration system. We don't want to see the separation of families. We want to be respected. and we want to be valued. And for this, that's why we're organizing. That's why my community is organizing as Migrant Justice. We don't want any more Polymigra, or the collaboration between police and immigration agents. We don't want to see any more deportations. We don't want to see families separated. And for workers in the dairy industry, even workers who aren't in the dairy industry, for all immigrant workers, we don't want to have the fear to raise our voice, to be able to freely participate in meetings and marches. And that's hard right now because of COVID, but we know that there won't always be COVID.
Gracias, Yadira, Madeline. Earl, if you would continue on with your reflections, sir.
Yes, the letter from the Birmingham jail was written in April of 1963, but it was, Dr. King wrote it in response to 8 white clergymen in Alabama who had said about the civil rights practice that he was engaged in, that it was unwise and untimely. Unfortunately, also, I have to say that one of those white clergymen was the Episcopal bishop of Alabama at the time as well. So, but the criticism was the actions he was undertaking were unwise and untimely. And I don't think you probably could have said anything that would have gotten under Dr. King's skin as much as that. So he had to, he said he usually didn't respond to criticism, but he was going to respond to that one. And in his response, he was especially, this quote that you've given us, Jack, that is so inspirational. This came out of the life and the struggles that he'd been engaged in. When he was in Montgomery and taking a leading role in the bus boycott, a couple of years after that, then he wrote a book called Stride Towards Freedom, with some of the lessons that he learned from that bus boycott, standing up for the rights of all, standing up especially for the rights of African Americans. And in his closing chapter there, Where Do We Go From Here? He says, "It is still not too late to act. Every crisis has both its dangers and opportunities. It can spell either salvation or doom. In the present crisis, America can achieve either racial justice or the ultimate social psychosis that can only lead to domestic suicide." That's what he found in 1959. Then just a few short months after this letter to the Birmingham jail, Dr. King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., there with the March on Washington, the March for Jobs and Freedom, literally with tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. And in that I Have a Dream speech, he spoke of the fierce urgency of now. Interestingly to me, on April 4th, 1967, he also, just literally a year before he was killed, in Riverside Church, he made another speech called Beyond Vietnam, his opposition to the Vietnam War, where he repeated that phrase, the fierce urgency of now. And so I take in that the now that he saw in the letter from the Birmingham jail, that fierce urgency of now that he spoke of on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, that fierce urgency of now in that speech toward the end of his life, that now is the time to act. And I think, as Mr. Gordon has said, there is that sense for Dr. King of God being here present now, here powerful in our actions. And when we take that fierce urgency of now, this time to act, then indeed we're acting both in the presence of God and with the power of God to address the inequalities, the racism, the sins that we face in our own day. And that's why this, I take this lesson just to be so absolutely crucial to what Dr. King spoke, in his lifetime, but that is just as important, if not more important, in our own day as we address the sins that leave us with 2 Americas and 2 Vermonts, as we address the deep poverty and the growing inequality in our society, as we address the systemic racism and the police brutality and police murders that we see over and over again throughout our society. It's that fierce urgency of now, being now present with God, being now in God's power, to be those co-creators, as he says, to be those co-workers with God, to overcome to find that true kingdom that he's looking for. So it's such an important lesson, both in his day, but even more crucial, even more important, even more to the call of where we are to be in our day as well.
Thank you, Earl. Appreciate that. Jen, if you would reflect upon the quote also and wrap up the second group.
So I believe, to me, what's resonating most from the long letter that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. writes is just in the beginning, the use of our time creatively. And if anything, given what our globe has experienced, being able to only communicate through a screen, being even further marginalized, I think creativity is where it must, where we must really rest and push ourselves to be innovative. We aren't going to return to normal in this 2021. We must strive to not return or to go back to normal, because going back means we are going back to systems that erased histories and stories of people that have been marginalized, Black, Indigenous, communities of color, peoples of color. So in Vermont, it seems to me that we must be building a multicultural coalition, and that, as Sue mentioned, we should be striving for a transformational change. We have that opportunity to really say what she said. And so it's not business as usual, and we need to look for peaceful, nonviolent disruptions. And again, peaceful, nonviolent disruptions. And so for me, anti-racism and being an anti-racist is a verb. It's a daily practice, like brushing my teeth, reading, eating. It's a daily practice. And sometimes I show up full of clarity, and sometimes I show up shaky and very uncomfortable. Did I say that right? Did I make a mistake right there? Yes, I did. Yes, I did, because not only am I showing up white, but I'm also showing up in a society where it is normal to be white. It is normal to see everything you see on TV and literature and magazines from the white perspective. Is that wrong? Is it bad to be white? No, it is not, but there is an acknowledgement. And so again, I think back to my Jewish practices, and while reading Me and White Supremacy, confession isn't usually a word that I'm familiar with in the Jewish practice, but rather a reckoning, and something that's done on Yom Kippur, which is our Day of Atonement. And it puts us in discomfort and feeling very uncomfortable. And I know that I need to sit in that discomfort, because then I go back to creativity, and I think about being a landscape architect, if I could just pull that in. And the act of designing spaces is really pushing and creating something that wasn't there before. It also means doing something new. And it also is very uncomfortable to be a creative, because it brings up a lot of insecurities. Creating design that wasn't there before. So to wrap up and focus on creativity, I want to really highlight some of the programs that the Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille are doing, which are Please Come, everyone's invited at a gateway to our monthly community coalition meetings. You can find that on Facebook. Just look up REAL, R-E-A-L. And then also I want to highlight a really wonderful, beautiful project that we're working on to fund is the Rural Arts Project, which is going to bring together Black, Indigenous peoples of color to tell oral histories that have not been told before, with murals and the documentation of those stories through a podcast, and then also literature reads for middle and high school students to really expose students to the history of white supremacy and the histories of marginalized members of our community. And then of course we have 3 subcommittees, but I will wrap it up there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. And yeah, just look, there's an awful lot happening and a lot of people locally in our state that really want to take action. I want to do a time check with Father Rick and Patty Rubin right now. Do we have time to have a last round of open discussion and see how it works for 5 or 10 minutes? Okay, I got a thumbs up on that. So I wanted to just put a thought before we have an open discussion, and during that, if the panelists would just unmute, and we'll try it under Zoom to see if we can talk. But a quote you probably have all heard many times, but it sticks in my mind as far as the days that I'm stuck as far as what's my next step. And he said, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. And that's as a community of faith, I think that's a good guidance point. So if you would all, the panelists, if you would all unmute and just reflect on some closing thoughts here and be free to try to discuss among yourself.
Well, I can start quickly just by saying 2 sort of big themes. I think that a lot of times for my bubble of privilege, people think it doesn't happen here in Vermont. We don't have poverty and racism in Vermont. And I think what has become clearer and clearer is nothing could be further from the truth. And for us to recognize, to listen and learn, I really love those points for those of us with the white privilege to be more of in the listening and learning mode. But also for that theme that I love, Jack, that you brought us to is taking action, and Earl, the fierce urgency of now. And to realize that it's possible in this state, yes, where these problems exist, but yes, where really a deep, strong sense of community and compassion also exists, and where change is truly possible. Whether it's the change in a life like I described to you, or in our community of Waterbury when Irene took us out, we came together, we dreamed together, we planned together, and we created a much, much stronger community even than before. And, you know, I'm going to just end by talking about migrant justice. I was in a Zoom legislative committee hearing room when they advocated to have $5 million appropriated for individual stimulus for folks who were not eligible because of their undocumented status. And you know what? They won. And now we're implementing. So big ideas, keep them going. Action at whatever level you're comfortable with, but it's there for you. And believe me, we need it because the problems are here in Vermont. Thank you.
Gary?
Jack,
Yeah.
that quote that you just gave, I like that. And I thought about in the Baha'i faith, we talk about faith as being conscious knowledge. So it's not just about believing in things unseen, but also recognizing that faith is active, that it's there, and that the assistance that you require, you will get based on your faith. So we take action as people of faith, understanding that we will get the confirmation that we need from God in our efforts to do his will and to correct these injustices and things that we have to do. So for me, it all revolves around around acting my faith, and my faith tells me that I have to work for the unity of mankind, that I have to work to eliminate prejudice, that I have to work to eliminate disparities in wealth and poverty, that I have to work to recognize the equality of men and women. These are all basic tenets of the Baha'i faith, and these are things that we work on at going back to what Jennifer was saying, every day. We talk about reflecting at the end of every day on what your actions during the day, and then improving upon that the next day. There's a saying in the faith where we talk about let each day be better than the preceding one. So when we talk about this idea of faith, it's very important, absolutely imperative as people of faith that we rely on that faith, but we act on that faith, and that our actions, that our faith will be confirmed through our actions, and that we will achieve the results that we seek.
Thank you. Yadira Madeline? Oh, it's okay. Jen, you can.
I want to give the time for, it's okay. Well, what I thought about when Sue spoke, and then Gary, I'm actually filled with optimism, and perhaps that's why I'm doing this work, is that when we all saw the evils that we saw in the Capitol, and when we all see the evils of Confederate flags driving by you on Route 100, because it happens, we cannot let those evils slow us down, because meetings like this and coalition building is how we show up and confront. And so what I've also thought about is being able to use the privilege of being white and showing up as white and being Jewish, using that privilege to show up with strength. So I get to be quiet, I get to pass as white, but I also get to, and am implored and obligated to use the time that I get in that privileged space to figure out how I need to build foundations of communities that are built with love. And I don't use love flippantly. I really truly mean showing up with love and good intention, and being quiet, and allowing someone who, speaks in another language to have translation. So I'm going to be quiet and allow plenty of time for Yadira and translator to talk. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yadira y Madeline.
A mí me da tan grande saber que personas, organizaciones están para ayudar, para hacer respetados nuestros derechos y válidos. Es una emoción tan grande y son un ejemplo para las personas como nosotros de que luchar sí vale la pena, que podemos hacer el cambio, que es difícil porque tenemos que tratar de hacer entender y educar a muchas personas, pero sabemos que entre luchas, pláticas, acercándonos a la organización indicada, sabemos que podemos hacer un gran cambio.
So Yadira says, thank you so much. It's huge. It's a huge honor, and makes me so happy to see so many people and organizations here to help and support in having our rights respected. And we can see that organizing and struggling and working together is really truly worth it. And we know that by coming together and joining up with organizations, getting involved, working together, that's really how we're going to be able to make change together. So thank you so much.
Gracias, Yadira.
Y también es para mí un orgullo ser un integrante de la Organización de Justicia Migrante y estar en este momento en este espacio y poder ser portador de la voz de ellos es un honor para mí.
And it's a huge honor to be part of migrant justice and be able to bring the voice of my community into this space. So thank you.
Yeah, gracias por todos. Earl, wrapping up this, what's your thoughts closing out?
Well, we began with the montage with Sweet Honey in the Rock singing Keep Your Eyes on the Prize. And for me, that is what our call to action from Dr. King throughout our history. It's about keeping our eyes on the prize. How do we have that faith that we can visualize those hopes and those hopes becoming real and to motivate us into the actions to do what Yadira said, no tengo miedo, levantar su voz. Don't be afraid, lift up your voice. And it's in doing that that I think, you know, we really see the real lesson, Dr. King, in that legacy, you know, from his tragic assassination so many years ago, but still true today, to continue to inspire us, so that with migrant justice, you know, could stand there on Church Street in Burlington and watch the president of Ben and Jerry's sign the Milk with Dignity, Leche con Dignidad contract. Now knowing we got to go for Hannaford's, now knowing there's still work to be done, but to see those hopes realized, that's what faith does for us in this. And I think that's, like I said, Dr. King's both legacy to all of us in the where we're still called to in our own day.
Thank you, Earl. So we've come to the end of our panel. There's going to be another one in another month, so please look for the announcement. And I'm very excited for the future panels that are going to join for the second time also. I've been reflecting on a guidance that I've held in my heart from Martin Luther King to continue forward action and how to be steadfast. And he said very simply, if I cannot do great things, I will do small things in a great way. And I just want you to know that we all can do small things in a great way. And just being here and being witness and is a small thing in a great way. So thank you all for your attendance tonight. And I'm going to be listening in so I don't have to do anything next time on the next panel. So peace be with you and be a light into the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Jack, and everybody for putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias por todos.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you all.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
everyone, for joining
Thanks,
us.
everyone.
I look forward to seeing all of you in, it's February 21st. I just want to make sure that is correct, Patty. Again, we will have all the information out into faith communities and beyond, so that I do hope you'll join us to continue the conversation. So thank you, Patty, for all your work. Wonderful. Have a good night, everyone. God bless. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
See?
you.
Look at me.
So wonderful.
Thank you so much, Yadira said.
I'm gonna go. Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.